operated by Endeavor. And as you know, most of the airlines have a kind of a subcarrier, if you will, that handles the regional flights. So that appears to be what that is. Then a regional flight for Delta Airlines, Minneapolis to Toronto in pretty rough landing conditions insofar as the snow on the ground. Anyway, Tom.
Tom, stand by for us. I want to get right to our NBC News aviation analyst, John Cox. John, the two big questions here. First, how do you think this plane flipped over, right? And the second question, after you answer that, walk our viewers through what the protocol is to get all of the passengers out safely, along with the crew and the pilots, because we saw that video of people coming out from an upside-down airplane there at Toronto Pearson.
Well, there's a couple of things here. If you look at this video, you'll see that the right wing, a significant portion of the right wing is missing. And that indicates that's what allowed the airplane to get upside down or inverted. So that's going to be one thing the investigators look at. You can also see that the exits are open. So once this airplane came to rest, and it was going relatively slowly when all of this occurred, because it's still in one piece. So that once it came to rest, it let the flight attendants get those exits open and get the people out. And as far as the weather conditions, it was quite gusty. So this would have been a challenging environment for any of the airplanes landing at Toronto. So the question is, what happened here? There's flight data recorders. Thankfully, there's crew that they'll be able to interview. So it's going to take time, but the investigators will learn what happened here.
And as a pilot, as somebody who knows these aircraft pretty well, when you're coming in on a runway that's like that looks a bit slick, there is snow everywhere, what are some of the things you're looking out for so an incident like this doesn't happen?
Well, the big thing is controlling the airspeed. You want to be at the proper airspeed, and as soon as the airplane touches down, you want to do everything you can to get it slowed and stopped. With this much gusty winds, it's pretty well down the runway. So the airplane's going to touch down at a lower speed, ground speed, because it's going into a headwind. And at that point, once it's on the ground, you get the engines in reverse, you get the spoilers up on the wing to transfer weight to the brakes, and you get it stopped. These are challenging conditions, but conditions that professional pilots deal with.
We have a statement that's just come into NBC News from the FAA. I want to read this for our viewers. It says, Delta Airlines Flight 4819, operated by Endeavor Air, crashed while landing at Toronto Pearson around 2:45 p.m. local. There were 80 people on board. The CRJ 900 departed Minneapolis-St. Paul International. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada will be in charge of the investigation and will provide any updates. I want to go back to Tom Costello. Tom, I'm sure you've covered incidents like this where, you know, both flight attendants and the pilots are trained to get passengers out safely. You got to think it stands to reason that there might have been some passengers that were still buckled in as this thing turned over, possibly, and then trying to get all those passengers out safely.
Yeah. Well, I would hope so. In that, I hope that everybody was wearing their seatbelts. That may have prevented catastrophic injuries or even fatalities. The regional paramedic service that responded is reporting, as you mentioned, 8 people injured, 1 critical, taken to area hospitals there in the Toronto area. And, you know, planes are designed that you are supposed to be able to get everybody out of the plane within 90 seconds of a crash or of a serious incident. Obviously, that becomes very complicated if you've got a fire and if you've got exits blocked. But as John mentioned, it does appear that you had multiple exits there that were opened up, which suggested that once people were able to get out of their seats, and maybe they were upside down at first, they were able to open those emergency exit doors. And that really is why, you know, everybody you talk to in the aviation world will tell you this is why you wear your seatbelts. You never know. You never know when you're going to need it. In flight, at altitude, with turbulence, or God forbid, you have an emergency like this on the ground. I did want to stress what you mentioned, though, from the FAA statement. It will be the Transportation Safety Board of Canada in charge of this investigation. However, you could imagine the NTSB will also be assisting because this plane originated from the States. It's an American carrier, so they will be a party to the investigation. But the Canadian TSB will be running it, and they work hand in glove with the NTSB, really considered to be one of the world's premier aviation investigative agencies, Tom.
You know, I do want to ask you a little bit more about that because this happened obviously in Toronto. We know this is Toronto's largest airport, just over Lake Ontario from Buffalo. What more can you tell our viewers about this airport and maybe some of the regulations, the guidelines, and their safety standards there in Canada?
They are very much in sync with the FAA, the aeronautical civil aviation authorities in Canada and the FAA work hand in glove. They sync up all of their rules and regs. And so this is almost going to seem like it happened at an American airport in terms of the response. The Canadians and the Americans coordinate every single day on aviation, on air traffic control, on investigations. Their transportation safety boards cooperate on a regular basis. Not just, of course, for a commercial aviation incident, but also if you've got a private plane, for example, that went down flying from one country to another. So there is a very, very close cooperation. And as you would expect, this is the busiest airport in all of Canada. I often say on the air when we're talking about watching how airports in the United States are impacted by weather, for example, I often say, well, don't forget about Toronto. It's literally right across the border, and it is a major airport that is also affected and affects airports in the United States. So they have a ground stop in effect there at Toronto, and that will impact not just traffic in Canada, it will affect also traffic down to the United States. And Tom, you know, a lot of folks who are going to Europe, for example, from the States, they will go through Toronto and then on to Europe and vice versa, coming back that way. So this will have a ripple effect today.
Tom, stand by for us. If you're just watching right now, we are covering the breaking news out of Toronto. There has been a plane accident, as you can see on your screen here, a Delta Airlines plane, flight 4819. It's a CRJ 900, has flipped over. There were 80 passengers, pilot and crew on board. Toronto Pearson Airport saying they have all been accounted for. We understand that at least 8 people are injured, 1 in critical condition. Joining us on the phone live now is Jeff Guzzetti. He's an NBC News aviation analyst and a former FAA and NTSB investigator. It's so great to have you, Jeff, on a night like this, on a day like this, because of what we're seeing here. Talk to me about what stands out to you about the accident you're seeing in front of your eyes right now. I'm noticing some damage there on one of the engines, but also you're looking at an airplane that is completely upside down.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, so this is a very serious incident. You don't even see the wings connected to the fuselage. Something must have happened during landing. Perhaps it cartwheeled. We just don't know. But to actually have a fuselage lying upside down without its wing box means that something significant happened. And it's just amazing that there was no loss of life. So it's just a matter of determining, looking back on what was happening to this airplane as it was on final approach. We know the weather conditions were extremely gusty, and perhaps that could have been an issue. But to have an airplane, what also strikes me, Tom, is there doesn't appear to be a giant fireball. There is some fire damage, but the fuselage looks fairly clean with its wings broken
Jeff,
off.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that because we have a shot of the engines up close. What appears to be the right engine, but it's flipped over, so it would appear to be the left right now. But you can see the streaks of black there. Is that what you were talking about, possible fire damage on that side?
Yes, absolutely. So there appears to be some fire damage there. But, Tom, we don't know whether that was whether that occurred in flight or as a result of the impact sequence. But there's definitely some fire damage there. And it seems to be localized to that area.
And that this happened in the middle of winter with what the airport is reporting, 20 inches of snow in the last week. Post-accident, does that snow actually help in an incident like this, or does it get in the way?
Oh, boy, it's difficult to say. So as long as the runways are clean, then you've got a good surface to land on, and I'm sure they were clean. It just depends on how much snowpack or snowbanks the height could have been as the airplane careened off of the runway. But I don't think it was that much of a factor in this case. And, you know, as I'm looking at that engine, Tom, you can see some longitudinal soot marks as if the fire did occur in flight, because that's how you would get it to those soot marks to translate horizontally down the longitudinal axis of that engine. So, again, just another clue that investigators will look for.
Talk to me about the pilot and the flight attendants here on this flight, able to get everybody out of that plane, some who may have been trapped upside down.
that would have been an incredible situation. So, certainly they know there's a problem. They're sitting upside down in their seats. So at that point, the two flight attendants would have done their best to try to get people out of the aircraft. So people are going to have to actually unbuckle themselves and perhaps fall down towards what would be the ceiling. And fortunately, it's a fairly small airplane, so the fall wouldn't have been that great. But still, there could have been some injuries just by unbuckling your seatbelt and trying to extricate yourself out of the airplane. You can bet that the flight attendants are doing their best to yell and to find ways for the passengers to get out as soon as possible.
Jeff, a lot of American viewers across the country are going to be watching this, and they're going to be thinking to themselves, there seems to be a lot of accidents. Is this just sort of an unfortunate series of events? And flying obviously is still very safe. We've just had these high-profile incidents back to back to back.
Well, I must tell you, this accident, I can see why the public would be very concerned. I still believe that commercial aviation is extremely safe, but it is extremely unusual to have these commercial accidents. And we're not talking about, private airplanes. We're talking about scheduled commercial airliners, like what happened in Washington, D.C., like what happened in Nome, Alaska, like what happened here. And that's very unusual. We haven't seen this spate of commercial accidents in quite a while. And it's just going to make people even more sensitized to flying. But I still think it's safe, but obviously there needs to be some attention to be put on this.
Jeff, stand by for us. I want to get back to Tom Costello. We are getting some new information now. We are being told there have been 9 people injured. 1 child was transported, and 1 person had to be airlifted to a trauma center. Tom, I want to go back to you. Have we heard from the airline? Are there any more statements coming out from the airport about what's happened here in Toronto?
Yeah, the airport has only tweeted out the following, that in fact they did have a plane crash there involving the Delta flight coming in from Minneapolis, and making the point that everybody has been accounted for, passengers as well as crew members. And then we heard from the union representing the flight attendants that they are responding to Toronto to assist their members who are working that flight. This is Minneapolis into Toronto, kind of a regular hourly flight, if you will, that goes back and forth from the United States right into Toronto on a regular basis. I did want to, underscore, to pick up on the conversation you were just having, though, in terms of the recent string of aviation incidents, Tom. This is going to yet again raise the concern about FAA staffing, air traffic control staffing. Now, this is a Canadian air traffic control tower, and this is under Canadian authority once it crosses the border. And yet, as you know, there has been this talk about maybe staff cuts at the FAA as a part of President Trump's effort to trim down the federal workforce. And yet, as you also know, the FAA has been complaining for years that they are understaffed in critical job positions, especially air traffic control. I was having a conversation with somebody today about whether air traffic control in America is being affected by the staff cuts. So far, not to their knowledge, and yet other positions related to maintaining critical equipment appear to have been cut. So this is going to feed into all of these recent incidents, and the safety of the total air traffic system is going to be very much a part of the conversation as we go forward, at least on this side of the country, of the border, I should say. Let me just underscore again, this is a Delta regional flight, and as a result, you were talking about maybe 75 to 85 or so passengers on board, part of that normal routine. By the way, the RJ, the regional jet, this is a Bombardier, so it is made in Canada. And these jets have a history of being a very robust plane able to handle colder conditions.
The workhorse of those regional airlines and those air fleets. We got some ATC audio of when this accident occurred around 2:18 Eastern. Let's listen in.
This airplane just crashed at 23. 7105, full up, go around.
That's basically all we have right now, essentially the moment when they realized that airplane had crashed. Tom, one of the things these major airports like Toronto Pearson have is their own fire departments, and they can react and get to these planes within seconds, as we see 2 of those vehicles from Toronto Fire right there over that Bombardier that has been flipped over.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is a requirement according to the International Air Transport Association, IATA, which is essentially the global airline and airport regulator. If you're going to be accepting and sending commercial flights into the air or coming into your airport, you've got to have professional fighters and updated equipment on site and able to get down to the runway. And I forgot the exact number, but I want to say it's either 90 seconds or 3 minutes, and sorry for not knowing that off the top of my head. But the bottom line is they have to have a very fast response time. Doesn't matter if you're in Canada or the United States. I'm now told, 3-minute response time in order to get to the crash site from wherever that fire station is on site. And that is going to be all over the country, all over Canada. It's the same response time, Tom.
Tom, we appreciate that. If you're just watching right now, we have been following this breaking news out of Toronto. A Delta Jet 4819 flipping over. All 80 passengers and crew said to be accounted for. 9 are injured. That concludes this NBC News special report. We're going to have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and a full wrap-up tonight on Nightly News. I'm Tom Llamas. We thank you for watching.